A skyscraper that seemed to scrape not just the clouds but the limits of human ambition. Inside, marble floors reflected the precision of a company where mistakes were not tolerated. Every employee who passed through the glass revolving doors knew that perfection wasn't an expectation here, it was survival. And at the very top of this glittering empire sat Adrian Blackwell, a man known equally for his brilliance and his ice. Lena Hart stood in the lobby clutching a slim folder, her reflection trembling slightly in the polished glass wall. She adjusted her navy blazer, inhaling deeply. Her heart beat faster than she wanted to admit. It was her first day. After months of rejection letters and temporary jobs, she had finally secured a position at the firm everyone in New York whispered about. Blackwell Industries, the empire that turned ideas into gold. She'd earned it on merit, not connections, and that made her proud. Her father would have been proud too, if he were still alive to see it. The elevator doors opened with a quiet sigh, and she stepped into the world where power hummed through the air like static. Executives strode by in tailored suits, eyes sharp, voices clipped. Her ID badge marked her as junior, and that alone made her invisible, until she entered the top-floor boardroom. Adrian Blackwell stood at the head of the table, a dark figure framed by the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. His charcoal suit fit like armor, every detail precise. The world called him a visionary. His employees called him something else, the Iron Mind. He ruled by intellect and silence, his commands delivered with a calmness that made defiance unthinkable. Lena found her assigned seat at the far end of the room, trying to disappear into her notepad. The meeting began. Figures, projections, strategies, the language of dominance filled the air. But when Adrian announced the launch of a new campaign aimed at outsourcing part of the company's creative team overseas, something inside Lena twisted. She raised her hand before she could stop herself. "Sir, I think there's an oversight in that plan," she said, her voice steady but her pulse racing. The room went still. No one interrupted Adrian Blackwell. Ever. He looked up slowly, those dark gray eyes locking onto her. They were colder than the glass surrounding them. "An oversight?" he repeated softly, as though tasting the word. "Yes," she replied, flipping open her notes. "The campaign data assumes consumer loyalty will hold, but the last quarter's metrics show a decline when production shifts away from in-house teams. People buy connection, not efficiency." Silence. Then, unexpectedly, a faint curve touched his lips, something between amusement and curiosity. "What's your name?" "Lena Hart, sir." "Well, Miss Hart," he said, stepping closer, his gaze never breaking from hers, "I built this company on efficiency. Emotions don't run corporations. Numbers do." "With respect," she countered, meeting his stare. "Numbers are made by people, and people feel." A flicker, so brief she almost missed it, passed through his eyes. Something like surprise, maybe recognition. The room held its breath. Finally, he turned away. "Noted," he said coolly. "We'll revisit the model." And just like that, the meeting continued. But Lena could feel his attention on her for the rest of the hour, sharp and assessing. When it ended, most of the team filed out quickly, whispering about the girl who had dared to correct the CEO. Lena gathered her notes, certain she'd just made a career-ending mistake. Then his voice came from behind her. "Miss Hart," she froze, turning slowly. He stood a few feet away, the city skyline glowing behind him. "You're confident," he said. "That's rare here." "Thank you, sir," she replied carefully. "Don't thank me," he said, slipping his hands into his pockets. "Just understand one thing." His eyes darkened, the temperature in the room seeming to drop with his next words. "I don't date employees. Ever." Lena blinked, caught off guard. "I didn't—" He held up a hand, almost amused at his own preemptive strike. "You challenged me in a room full of executives. That's bold, but let's keep boldness professional, shall we?" She nodded, her cheeks warm. "Of course." Adrian watched her go, something unfamiliar stirring beneath his calm. For years he'd buried the man beneath the CEO, the one who once believed in connection, in trust. But for a brief moment, when Lena Hart had met his gaze without flinching, the ice had cracked. As the elevator doors closed behind her, she exhaled shakily, unaware that the man she'd just challenged was still watching the reflection of her leaving, his expression unreadable. He didn't know it yet, but the girl who spoke of people and feelings had just disrupted the order of his empire, and the walls he'd spent a lifetime building had begun, quietly, to fracture. The next morning began under a sky so bright it almost mocked the tension simmering inside the glass tower of Blackwell Industries. The entire 47th floor moved with the same silent precision as a well-tuned machine. Phones rang once, never twice. Coffee cups were placed on desks without clatter. Only one thing had shifted: the way eyes followed Lena Hart when she stepped out of the elevator. Whispers trailed her like perfume. The new assistant who'd dared to interrupt Adrian Blackwell in front of his board. The man whose stare could freeze entire departments had not fired her. That alone was enough to feed gossip for days. Lena kept her chin high, pretending not to notice. She'd grown up around storms. She knew how to walk through thunder. Adrian's office door stood open, a silent invitation and a warning at once. He was already at his desk, sleeves rolled, tie loosened just enough to suggest the night had been long. His attention was fixed on a digital schematic projected across his glass wall, but when she entered, he spoke without looking up. "You're early." "I thought I should be," she said. "After yesterday." He finally looked at her, eyes unreadable. "Most people try to disappear after correcting me in front of an audience. Maybe that's why they never change anything." For a heartbeat, silence hung between them, sharp, charged, alive. Then he motioned to the seat across from him. "You've reviewed the Thompson proposal?" She nodded and passed him a folder. "It's solid on surface, but something doesn't fit. The vendor cost margins are inconsistent. Either they're hiding something or someone's lying." He flipped through the pages, interest flickering behind his calm mask. "You think they're defrauding us?" "I think they're playing you," she said softly. Adrian leaned back, studying her. Most people approached him with fear or admiration. Lena brought him challenge and inconvenient truth. It stirred something he didn't want to name. "Prove it," he said finally. "You have 48 hours. Her eyes widened. 48 hours? That's impossible. You told me people matter more than numbers. Convince me with both." She met his gaze, determination steady. "Fine." As she turned to leave, his voice followed her. "Miss Hart." She stopped at the door. He hesitated, the faintest crack in his composure. "You've got courage." "Don't mistake that for safety." She didn't answer. She just smiled. The kind of smile that unsettled his balance more than he cared to admit. When she was gone, Adrian exhaled slowly. The walls of his office caught his reflection, composed, untouchable. But the calm was an illusion. For the first time in years, someone had walked straight through his defenses without even realizing it. That night, when most of the building emptied, Lena was still at her desk, surrounded by files and glowing screens. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rolling over the city. In the darkened office, the hum of servers and the rhythm of her typing filled the silence. She was close, too close, to something hidden deep in the Thompson records. She didn't hear Adrian's footsteps until his reflection appeared beside hers in the glass. "You're still here." "So are you," she replied, startled but refusing to show it. "I own the building." "You don't. I own my work," she said quietly. "And something in these files doesn't add up." He moved closer, scanning the screen over her shoulder. The faint scent of her shampoo mixed with the storm air. His pulse shifted, unexpected and unwelcome. "Show me." Their shoulders brushed. Lightning flared outside, and for an instant, the two reflections in the window looked like a single shape. Ice and fire caught mid-collision. The data on the screen revealed patterns, hidden payments, shadow accounts. Her instincts had been right. Adrian's voice dropped to a murmur. "If you're right, this could ruin them. If I'm wrong, it could ruin me." He looked down at her, the challenge in her words igniting something dangerous. "Then we'll both find out," he said. His tone was low, almost intimate, though his face stayed impassive. "Together." The lights flickered as thunder cracked above the city. For a long moment, neither moved. Then he turned away, forcing the tension back behind a wall of professionalism. "Go home, Miss Hart. Get some sleep. I'm not finished yet. He paused at the doorway, his silhouette framed in stormlight. That's what I'm afraid of. When he left, Lena stared at the glowing screen, heart pounding. She didn't know that behind his closed office door, Adrian stood in the dark, replaying her words, feeling something he'd buried years ago start to wake. The storm outside raged on, and somewhere inside him, another one began to rise. The rain had not stopped since midnight, and the storm had turned the city into a blur of reflections and noise. Inside the dark tower of Blackwell Industries, the air smelled of coffee and electricity. Lena sat at her desk surrounded by files and glowing monitors, her hair falling loose as she stared at a pattern that refused to make sense. Each click of her mouse pulled her deeper into the mystery until the elevator chimed behind her. Adrian stepped out of the shadows, his suit dark against the light. He looked like the storm had followed him, and his eyes sharp and unreadable. "You didn't go home," he said, his voice quiet but heavy. She didn't look up. "I found something," she whispered. He came closer, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the empty floor. "Show me." On her screen, the numbers pulsed like a heartbeat. Hidden transactions buried under layers of false invoices. Someone inside the company had been moving money out of research budgets into ghost accounts. Lena's voice trembled slightly when she spoke. "Whoever did this had access to everything, even your private systems." Adrian leaned closer, studying the data, his expression hardening. He could feel her breath near his shoulder, could hear the tiny quiver in her voice. "When was the last time you slept?" he asked. "When was the last time you trusted someone?" she shot back. For a second, the mask cracked and something human flickered in his eyes. Then his phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the tension. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. "It's the Thompson liaison," he muttered. "They're requesting an unscheduled meeting tonight." "That's too soon," Lena said. "They know we're getting close." He pocketed the phone and looked at her directly. "You're not coming. It's not safe." She crossed her arms, defiant. "I found this, I'm going." He stared at her for a long moment, torn between anger and something else he didn't want to name. Finally, he nodded. "Fine, but you follow my lead and you don't speak unless I say so." Hours later, the rain had slowed to a drizzle as Adrian's car pulled into an underground garage beneath a luxury hotel. The meeting room was small, windowless, and far too quiet. A man in a gray suit waited for them, his smile polite, but his eyes calculating. "Mr. Blackwell, Miss Hart, thank you for coming so late," he said. Adrian took a seat, his posture casual but his tone edged with steel. "Let's skip the courtesy. You've been shifting funds through shell vendors. I want to know why." The man's smile didn't fade. "You think you can accuse the Thompsons without consequences, Mr. Blackwell?" Adrian's gaze didn't waver. "I don't think I know." The man leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Then you should also know your assistant has been quite active in our files. We appreciate ambition but not espionage." Lena froze. Adrian's hand tightened on the armrest, his jaw locking. "What did you say?" The man slid a small envelope across the table. Inside were printed photos of Lena in the office alone at night, her reflection caught on the glass walls like a thief. She stared at them in shock. "I was working," she said quietly. The man's smile turned cruel. "Try convincing the press of that. One word from us and her career is finished." Adrian's calm shattered. He stood, his voice cold as the storm outside. "Touch her reputation and I will destroy everything you built." The man's smile faltered for the first time. Adrian pulled Lena to her feet and walked out without another word. In the car, silence hung between them, heavy with what they had just seen. Lena finally whispered. "They set us up, didn't they?" "Yes," Adrian said, his voice low and dangerous. "And now they'll regret it." When they reached the office, he locked the doors and turned to her eyes, burning with determination. "You were right," he said. "Someone inside betrayed us. Find out who. And Lena, whatever happens next, don't trust anyone. Not even me." Her heart pounded as she watched him disappear into his private office. The storm outside had passed, but the one inside Blackwell Industries had only begun. The next morning, the city looked calm, but inside the Blackwell Tower, everything felt like glass under pressure. Adrian had not slept. The memory of those photos on the table kept replaying in his mind. Lena's frightened eyes, the smug smile of the man who thought he could buy silence. He stood by the window, his reflection sharp against the sunrise. Behind him, the door opened quietly. Lena stepped in, holding a flash drive between her fingers. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but her voice was steady. "I found something." Adrian turned slowly, every part of him tense. "Show me." She connected the drive to his screen. Rows of code and encrypted transfers appeared, lines of numbers flowing like a secret language. I traced the ghost accounts, she said. They link back to someone inside your executive circle. Adrian's pulse quickened. Who? She looked up, meeting his eyes. Your vice president, Daniel Cole. For a moment, silence filled the office. Adrian's oldest friend. His second in command, the man who had stood beside him since the company began. He felt the betrayal hit like a blade to the ribs. Are you certain? Lena nodded. The pattern is clean, but I can prove it with the right access. I need your authorization. He hesitated, then handed her his personal keycard. Do it. Whatever you find, bring it to me directly. No one else. Hours later, Lena worked alone in the data vault beneath the tower where the company's deepest systems lived. The air was cold, humming with servers and secrets. She entered codes, her hands trembling as she unlocked the encrypted folders. A new pattern appeared, one that didn't just expose Daniel, but connected to something darker. Offshore accounts tied to the Thompson family, the same people threatening them. It wasn't business corruption, it was a full-scale conspiracy. A shadow moved behind her. She spun around but saw only the flicker of lights. Then the sound of footsteps retreating fast. She hurried to eject the drive and hide it just as the door opened. Daniel stood there, his expression too calm. Working late, Miss Hart. Her heart pounded, but she forced a smile. Just reviewing data. His eyes glinted. I heard you've been getting close to Adrian. Dangerous hobby. She stepped back, gripping the drive in her pocket. Are you threatening me? He smiled without warmth. I'm warning you. Curiosity ruins more than careers. Before she could answer, Adrian appeared in the doorway. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. Step away from her, Daniel. The other man turned his charm into mock concern. Adrian, you're letting emotion cloud your judgment. This girl is leading you into ruin. Adrian's expression didn't change, but his voice was cold steel. Funny coming from the man who's been stealing from me. Daniel's face tightened. You can't prove that. I can and I will, Adrian said. Now get out of my building. Daniel's mask cracked for just a second, revealing the threat beneath the polish. You'll regret this, he said before walking out. When the door closed, Adrian turned to Lena. Are you hurt? She shook her head, but her hands were shaking. He took them gently, steadying her. You did good. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with adrenaline and fear. You could have been ruined because of me. He stepped closer, his voice lower. I was ruined long before you walked in here. I just didn't know it. The air between them grew heavy. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and she didn't move away. The tension that had lived between them for weeks finally broke. He kissed her slow and fierce, his control unraveling completely. She clung to him, the fear melting into something electric and undeniable. When he pulled back, both were breathing hard, the reality of what had just happened settling like fire between them. We shouldn't, she whispered. His hand stayed on her cheek. Tell me to stop and I will. She didn't. Instead, she kissed him again with all the emotion she'd been holding back. The night swallowed the rest of their words. Hours later, the office lights burned low. Adrian stood watching her sleep on the couch, wrapped in his jacket. He touched her hair gently, his mind torn between desire and dread. He knew the war had only begun. Daniel wouldn't go quietly. The Thompsons wouldn't stop until they were both destroyed. As dawn broke over the city, Adrian made a silent vow. He would protect her no matter the cost, even if it meant losing everything he had built. Outside, the first rays of light touched the tower, making it gleam like ice. Inside, Adrian Blackwell felt something melt completely for the first time in years. The morning after felt unreal, as if the entire city held its breath waiting for something to break. Inside Blackwell Tower, tension spread through every floor like smoke. People whispered in corners, glancing at closed doors and unanswered emails. Adrian arrived earlier than usual, his jaw set, his silence sharper than any command. The entire building knew something had happened, but no one dared to ask what. Lena kept her distance, moving through the hallways with quiet purpose, but the memory of last night burned in her mind. The warmth of his touch, the weight of his promise, the fear behind his calm eyes. She wanted to believe it was more than impulse, yet a voice inside her whispered that desire and danger had just become the same thing. By noon, the boardroom filled with murmurs. Adrian entered with Daniel already seated at the far end, pretending confidence. Gentlemen, Adrian began without looking at him. We have a problem. He tossed a printed report onto the table, the evidence of the financial leak exposed line by line. The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. Daniel's smile didn't falter. Anyone could have fabricated that. Lena stood near the door watching. She saw the way Adrian's hand clenched slightly before he spoke again. The transfers route through your private shell company registered under your brother's name in Zurich. Still fabricated. Daniel's tone was smooth, but his eyes flickered. Adrian leaned forward, voice low enough to slice through steel. You betrayed the company and you put her in danger. The room shifted, eyes darting toward Lena. Daniel's composure broke. She was never supposed to find out he snapped. There it was. The admission hung in the air like the crack before a storm. Adrian's voice dropped to a whisper. Security, get him out. 2 guards appeared. Daniel stood brushing off his suit, his gaze fixed on Adrian. You think this ends with me? He said coldly. The Thompsons will come for you both. They always collect their debts. Adrian watched him leave, but the words stayed like a curse. When the door closed, Lena stepped forward quietly. They won't stop, she said. You know that. He nodded. That's why we don't wait for them. That night he called her to his private residence overlooking the city. The air smelled of rain again, as if storms followed them wherever they went. When she arrived, he was standing by the window, the skyline glowing behind him. We're leaving tomorrow, he said. She frowned. Leaving? There's a conference in London, he continued. But it's a cover. I need to meet someone who can prove the Thompsons' involvement. Someone who won't live long if we stay quiet. She hesitated. You trust this person. I don't trust anyone anymore, he said softly. Except you. She stepped closer until she could see the exhaustion hidden beneath his calm. You've built your life on control, Adrian, she said. Why risk everything for this? Because control didn't save the woman I loved, he answered. This time I'll fight back before I lose another. Lena's breath caught. The weight of his words wrapped around her heart. She touched his hand, and for a moment the walls between them vanished. Then the sound of glass shattering ripped through the room. Adrian grabbed her, pulling her down just as a bullet tore through the window, spraying shards across the floor. Get down! He shouted, dragging her behind the desk. Alarms blared as security flooded the hallways. She clutched his arm, trembling. Someone fired again, hitting the glass wall beside them. Adrian's voice was steady even as chaos erupted outside. They've moved faster than I expected. Who are they? She whispered. The answer came like ice. The Thompsons don't send threats. They send messages. When the noise finally died, the office was wrecked, shards glittering like stars on the floor. Adrian helped her up, blood streaking his sleeve from a shallow cut. He didn't seem to notice. She stared at him, eyes wide. They were aiming for you. No, he said grimly. They were aiming for us. In that moment, Lena understood this was no longer about a company or betrayal. They had crossed into something far more dangerous, where love and survival were now tied together. Adrian turned to her, his voice quiet but full of steel. Pack a bag. We leave before sunrise. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline again, but inside him a different kind of storm raged, one that no amount of control could ever contain again. The city was still asleep when Adrian and Lena left for the airport before dawn. The streets glistened with the last traces of rain, and the sky was painted in soft gray light. Neither of them spoke much. Adrian's expression was unreadable, while Lena watched him from the back seat, wondering how a man so composed could still bleed. The cut on his arm from the attack had been stitched, but she could see how deep the wound really went. Not in his skin, but in his trust. When the jet lifted off the ground, the world below turned small and distant, like all the things Adrian was trying to leave behind. Lena sat across from him, trying to steady her own heartbeat. Every few seconds she glanced at him. His hands rested on a file labeled Thompson Holdings, but she knew his mind wasn't on the paper. It was on the bullet that had nearly killed them. He finally broke the silence. Someone inside the company gave them our location. She met his eyes. You think Daniel did it? He shook his head. Daniel's too arrogant to hide his moves. This came from someone higher, someone with reach. Hours later, they landed in London under gray skies. A car waited for them with tinted windows and a driver who didn't speak. Lena tried to ignore the way the driver kept glancing at the rearview mirror. When they reached the hotel, Adrian leaned close and whispered, Don't unpack. We're not staying here. That night they met a man in an old cathedral converted into a private club. He was known only as Rowan, a former investigator who once worked for the Thompsons. His face was half hidden in the shadow of the stained glass light. "You're late," he said, his voice rough. Adrian's reply was calm. "We were shot at." Rowan nodded as if that were normal. "You're digging into things best left buried, Mr. Blackwell. The Thompsons have friends in governments and enemies in graves." Adrian leaned forward. "I didn't come here for warnings. I came for proof." Rowan slid a small envelope across the table. Inside were documents linking Thompson Holdings to offshore accounts and political bribes, but as Lena scanned the pages, her breath caught. One name stood out. "Adrian Blackwell." She looked up in disbelief. "This says you authorized these transactions." Adrian's eyes darkened. "I never signed those." Rowan's tone was quiet. "Someone forged your approval. If this leaks, you'll be destroyed before you can defend yourself." Lena's hands trembled slightly. "They're framing you." Rowan nodded. "They already have." A sudden noise echoed from the entrance, heavy footsteps approaching fast. Rowan's expression changed. Too late. He shoved the documents toward Adrian. "Go now." Through the back. Gunfire erupted as the glass shattered above them. Adrian pulled Lena down behind a pew wood splintering around them. He shouted over the noise, "Stay low." She nodded, terrified but focused. He fired back at the masked men closing in through the smoke. They escaped through a service corridor, their footsteps echoing in the dark. Outside rain poured down again, washing the blood from Adrian's sleeve. They ran until the church was just a faint shadow behind them. When they finally stopped under an old bridge, Adrian leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Lena clutched the wet papers to her chest. "They're hunting us," she said. He nodded, rain dripping from his hair. "Then let them hunt." His voice was low but full of quiet fury. "We'll turn every weapon they use against us. You wanted to see the truth, Lena. Now you're living inside it." She looked up at him, the fear in her eyes slowly turning to resolve. "What do we do now?" she asked. He stepped closer, lightning flashing behind him. "Now we stop running. We fight back." Their eyes met the space between them, charged with something beyond fear, something that felt like destiny. As thunder rolled through the night, Adrian took her hand and whispered, "Whatever happens, you stay with me." She didn't answer with words, she just held tighter. Far above them, hidden behind clouds, another storm began to form, one that would decide everything they were fighting for. The night in London stretched endlessly, as if time itself was holding its breath for what was coming next. Adrian and Lena moved through the narrow streets like shadows avoiding cameras and people. Every window felt like an eye, every sound like a threat. The documents they carried could destroy one of the most powerful families in the world, but it could also destroy Adrian if anyone believed the forged signatures were real. They found temporary refuge in an old apartment above a closed cafe. The place smelled of dust and forgotten stories. Adrian secured the door while Lena spread the wet documents on the table to dry. The flickering lamp above them threw their faces into half light, half darkness. She looked at him, her voice low. "You should rest." He shook his head. "If I sleep, they win." Hours passed in silence until Lena noticed something strange on one of the papers. A handwritten note at the bottom of the page, barely visible under the light. She tilted it closer to the lamp. The ink glimmered faintly. "It's a code," she whispered. Adrian moved beside her, studying the faint lines. "What kind of code?" "A name," she said softly. "Someone called a Whitmore." Adrian froze. He hadn't heard that name in years. Amelia Whitmore had been his mentor, the woman who taught him how to build his empire before vanishing mysteriously. If she was tied to the Thompsons, that meant the conspiracy reached back to the beginning of Blackwell Industries itself. He straightened his collar, his tone suddenly cold and precise again. "Pack the files. We're going to find her." Lena looked at him, shocked. "You know where she is?" He hesitated. "I know where she was buried." Before she could ask what he meant, the lights flickered. A second later, the window shattered inward. A small metal sphere rolled across the floor, hissing smoke. Adrian grabbed Lena, pulling her to the ground as the room filled with choking gas. "Go now," he shouted, pulling her toward the back door. They stumbled into the alley, coughing as figures in black approached from the street. Lena could barely see through the smoke, but Adrian pulled her behind a car just as bullets tore through the air. He fired back with the small handgun he had hidden in his coat. One of the attackers fell. The others retreated into the fog. When the silence returned, Lena's hands shook. "They found us again," she whispered. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Which means they never lost us." He looked at her eyes full of fear and stubborn courage. "Whoever is doing this knows every move we make." "That's impossible," she said. He met her gaze. "Not if it's someone on the inside." The realization hit them both at the same time. Someone inside Blackwell Industries was feeding their location directly to the Thompsons. Someone who knew his habits, his roots, his private codes. By dawn, they reached a safe house outside the city, a secluded farmhouse owned by one of Adrian's old contacts. Inside it was quiet, except for the sound of rain against the roof. Lena sat by the fireplace, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. He stood near the window watching the gray horizon. "You think one of your own betrayed you," she said. "I know it," he replied. "There's only one person who could have accessed those encrypted systems without alerting me." He turned to face her, his eyes cold but wounded. "My personal assistant back in New York, Claire. She's worked for me for 8 years. Lena's breath caught. "You trusted her." "I trusted everyone who never gave me a reason not to," he said quietly. "That was my mistake." She walked to him, her voice trembling. "Adrian, you can't fight all of them alone." He looked down at her, his tone softer now. "I'm not alone anymore. That's what scares them." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed with a blocked number. He hesitated, then answered. The voice on the other end was calm and female. "You should stop running, Adrian. You're chasing ghosts." His body froze. "Claire, you always thought the Thompsons were the enemy," she continued. "But the truth started with you. Ask yourself why Amelia Whitmore disappeared." The call ended. Adrian stared at the phone as if it had burned him. Lena stepped closer. What did she mean? He didn't answer for a long time. Then he whispered the words that changed everything. "Amelia didn't vanish. I made her vanish." The firelight flickered across his face, revealing a secret buried deep in guilt. Lena's heart pounded as she realized she didn't fully know the man she had fallen for. Outside, the storm grew louder, the wind howling through the trees, as if the night itself had heard the confession. In that moment, one truth became clear. Adrian Blackwell wasn't just running from the Thompsons. He was running from his own past, and that past had finally found him. The storm outside the farmhouse raged through the night, shaking the windows like a warning. Lena couldn't sleep. Adrian sat by the dying fire, his face lit only by the flicker of orange light, his eyes lost somewhere far away. He hadn't spoken much since the phone call, the one that revealed more about his past than she ever imagined. Finally, she whispered, "Tell me what you meant. What did you do to her?" He didn't look at her when he answered. "Years ago, when I was building Blackwell Industries, Amelia Whitmore was my partner, not just in business. She was brilliant, ruthless visionary, but she found something dark in the early investors, something that linked them to the Thompsons. She wanted to expose them. I told her to wait, to be careful. When she refused, I leaked her location to buy time. That same night, she disappeared." Lena stared at him in disbelief. "You think they killed her?" He nodded slowly. "And they left me alive because I stayed silent." The weight of his confession hung in the air like smoke. She wanted to hate him for it, but she could see the guilt carved deep into him. "You've been carrying this alone," she said. He met her gaze, his voice low and cracked. "Until you." Before she could respond, headlights flashed through the rain, cutting across the window. Adrian was on his feet in an instant. "Get down," he ordered. She dropped beside the couch as a vehicle pulled up outside. 3 figures stepped out, guns glinting under the lightning. Adrian grabbed his weapon and moved toward the back door, motioning for her to stay quiet. But Lena wasn't the kind to hide while others bled. She followed close behind. They slipped into the barn just as the front door of the farmhouse burst open. From inside came the sound of boots and a man's voice calling out. "Adrian Blackwell, surrender the files and maybe we'll let the girl live." Adrian clenched his jaw. "Thompson's men." He whispered a plan. "We draw them away from the house, then head for the river behind the property." They moved through the darkness of the barn, but one of the attackers spotted movement near the window. Gunfire ripped through the air. Wood splintered inches from Lena's face. Adrian fired back, hitting the engine of the attacker's vehicle. Smoke erupted and chaos followed. He pulled her toward the back exit through the storm, their shoes sinking into the mud. They ran across the open field, rain pounding down like war drums. The gunmen chased them, their flashlights slicing through the night. Lena stumbled, but Adrian caught her, his hand gripping hers tightly. Just ahead, he shouted. The river. When they reached the edge, the water was wild and fast, but it was their only escape. He looked at her eyes, fierce. Trust me. She nodded without hesitation. They jumped together, vanishing into the black current as bullets tore through the rain above. The cold hit like knives, but Adrian held her close, pulling her through the current until they reached the other side. They dragged themselves onto the bank, coughing and shaking. For a moment, all they could do was breathe. Then Lena whispered, "What now?" Adrian turned his head toward the distance where faint city lights shimmered through the fog. Now we disappear. By sunrise, they found shelter in an abandoned train yard miles from the farmhouse. Adrian made a fire from broken crates, his shirt torn, his hands scraped raw. Lena wrapped his arm with a strip from her sleeve. "You saved me again," she said softly. He looked at her eyes, tired but burning. "I didn't save you, Lena. You saved me the moment you walked into that boardroom and reminded me I still had a soul." Before she could answer, a faint metallic sound echoed through the yard. She froze. Adrian's hand went for his gun. A shadow moved between the trains. Then a voice called out, "Adrian, it's me!" They turned to see a woman step into the light of the fire. Her hair was streaked with silver, her eyes sharp and alive. Lena's breath caught. Adrian went still as stone. Amelia Whitmore. For a moment, no one spoke. Adrian rose slowly, his expression unreadable. "You're supposed to be dead," he said. She smiled faintly. "So are you." Lena looked between them, the firelight reflecting in her wide eyes. The ghost from Adrian's past was alive and standing before them, and as the wind carried the storm away, the truth that had been buried for years was about to surface. Amelia's next words shattered the silence. "You're fighting the wrong enemy, Adrian. The Thompsons didn't destroy your empire. Someone inside it did. And you already know their name." Adrian's heart froze as realization struck. Amelia's gaze didn't waver. "The one who betrayed you isn't Daniel or Claire. It's someone far closer." Lena felt a chill crawl up her spine as Amelia's eyes turned toward her. The wind tore through the train yard as if it carried the weight of everything unspoken. Sparks from the small fire flickered between them. Amelia, standing like a phantom brought back from the grave. Adrian frozen and silent, Lena caught between disbelief and fear. Amelia's words echoed in the air, heavy enough to break something inside him. "The one who betrayed you isn't Daniel or Claire, it's someone far closer." Lena's throat went dry. She could feel Amelia's stare digging into her as if searching for something beneath her skin. Adrian finally spoke, his voice tight and low. "Explain." Amelia stepped closer, her boots crunching against the gravel. "You brought the right person into your life at the wrong time, Adrian. The Thompsons didn't need spies inside your company. They needed someone inside your heart." Lena's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" Amelia's tone didn't waver. "You think it was luck that she found those files so easily, that she got hired at the exact moment the leaks began. The job application, the glowing references, the promotion. Every step was planned." Adrian turned toward Lena, the disbelief in his eyes slowly shifting toward something darker, something like pain. "Tell me she's lying," he said, his voice rough. Lena shook her head rapidly. "I swear to you, Adrian, I didn't know any of this when I came. I thought it was just a job." Amelia watched quietly. "She didn't deny it, Adrian. She said when she came, which means she knows now." Lena's breath caught. "Amelia, please," she whispered. "I was forced into it. My father owed the Thompsons everything. They said if I didn't give them access to your systems, they'd destroy what was left of his business. I tried to stop after I met you, but it was too late." Adrian's world went silent. Every wall he had ever built, every rule he had lived by collapsed in that single heartbeat. The woman he had risked his life to protect had been the weapon used against him. He took a step back, his eyes burning with betrayal. "You could have told me," he said quietly. "You should have trusted me." She reached for him, tears mixing with the rain. "I was trying to protect you. I didn't know they'd try to kill you." Adrian turned away, lightning flashing across his face. The storm that had followed them since New York had finally come inside. Amelia's voice cut through the thunder. "She's telling the truth, Adrian. The Thompsons used her, but she's not your enemy. The real traitor still holds your company." Lena looked at Amelia through her tears. "Then why tell him like this?" Amelia's answer was cold. "Because he needs anger to survive what's coming. Compassion won't save him now." Adrian faced Amelia, eyes hard again. Then who is it? Who still controls the Thompsons' hold on my company? Amelia hesitated. The man funding them from within your own walls. Your father's old partner. Adrian froze. That's impossible, he's been dead for 10 years. Amelia stepped closer, her face serious. Not dead. Hidden. The man you buried in your past is still alive, and he's coming for you. Before Adrian could respond, a sharp crack echoed through the night. A bullet tore through the silence, hitting the fire and scattering sparks into the air. Amelia shoved them both down behind a train car. Snipers shouted in the distance. They found us, she hissed. Adrian grabbed Lena, pulling her close. Stay low, he ordered. She clung to him, her voice trembling. I didn't betray you, Adrian, I swear. He met her eyes for just a second, and something inside him broke again. I want to believe you, he whispered. But right now, belief can get us both killed. They crawled between the cars as gunfire rained down around them. Amelia fired back, covering their escape. When they reached the far end of the yard, Adrian turned to help her, but she shook her head. Go, I'll slow them down. No, he shouted, but she was already running toward the attackers, her figure vanishing into the smoke. Lena pulled at his arm. We have to move. He followed her through the rain until they reached a tunnel that led beneath the tracks. The roar of the storm above faded as they descended into darkness. They collapsed against the damp concrete, catching their breath. Adrian's hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage and heartbreak. She watched him silently, knowing words would only make it worse. When he finally spoke, his voice was colder than it had ever been. They took everything from me once. They won't get to do it again. Lena reached for his hand, afraid to lose him completely. What will you do now? She whispered. He looked at her, the fury in his eyes replaced by a deadly calm. I'm done running. Tomorrow I go back to New York. Lena's heart pounded. That's suicide. He stood straight, his shadow stretching down the tunnel. Then I'll die on my own terms, not theirs. As the storm quieted above them, the future stretched ahead, uncertain and dangerous. Lena knew that when the sun rose, nothing would ever be the same again. Adrian Blackwell was no longer just a man fighting for his company. He had become something else entirely, a man ready to burn his empire to the ground to reclaim his soul. The morning sky over New York was the color of steel as Adrian Blackwell returned to the city he once ruled. The private jet landed quietly. No press, no security detail, only the weight of vengeance and truth. Lena sat beside him, her eyes tired but unyielding. She had not left his side even when he could barely look at her. Somewhere between betrayal and survival, they had become bound by something deeper than either could name. The car drove them through the heart of Manhattan, past the tower that still bore his name. Blackwell Industries gleamed like a monument to everything he had built and lost. The board thought he was dead. The Thompsons thought he was finished. But Adrian was done playing by their rules. Today he would walk into that building and end it all his way. Inside the tower, whispers spread like wildfire. Employees froze as the man they thought gone forever stepped out of the elevator. Adrian walked straight to the top floor, the echo of his footsteps sharp against the marble. Lena followed a few steps behind, the tension in the air almost electric. In the boardroom, Claire was already there waiting. The woman who had once served him tea and arranged his meetings now stood beside the chairman of the board, smiling like a serpent. Her tone was calm, too calm. I thought you were smarter than this, Adrian. Coming back here after everything we buried. Adrian's voice was low but steady. I buried the wrong people. He tossed a folder onto the table, the stolen documents Amelia had given him, the ones that proved the Thompsons' connection to Claire and the missing funds, the board members. Exchanged glances, some pale, some furious. Claire's smile didn't fade. You think this will save you? I have enough evidence to put your name on every illegal transaction this company ever made. He stepped closer, eyes cold as winter. You forged my signature, but the original logs prove whose system it came from. Yours. For the first time, her composure cracked. Guards, he ordered, but no one moved. Every eye in the room had turned to her. The chairman's voice was icy. Claire, you are relieved of your position, effective immediately. Rage twisted her face. You think this changes anything? You'll still lose everything, Adrian. The Thompsons never fail. Adrian leaned in, his voice quiet enough for only her to hear. Then they've never met me at full strength. As security escorted her out, Lena stood frozen near the window, her pulse racing. Adrian turned to the others. You want to save this company, then clean it. Every contract, every deal tied to the Thompsons ends today. If that destroys the empire, so be it. We start again from zero. The board erupted in argument, but he didn't wait for approval. He walked out of the room, his authority no longer corporate but absolute. Outside, the rain had begun again, streaking down the glass walls of the tower. Lena followed him to his office, the one place where it had all started. He stood behind his desk, looking at the city below. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she expected. I built this world out of fear and ambition, and it nearly killed everyone I cared about. She moved closer. You can still rebuild it. He looked at her. Finally really looked at her. I don't want to rebuild an empire. I want to build a life. Before she could respond, the door burst open. Claire stood there soaked from the rain, a gun in her hand and madness in her eyes. You ruined everything, she screamed. Adrian stepped in front of Lena, shielding her. Don't do this, Claire. Her hands shook, but her aim was steady. You took everything from me. You made me nothing. No, he said calmly. You did that when you chose greed over loyalty. The gun fired. The sound tore through the office like thunder. Lena screamed as Adrian staggered backward, clutching his shoulder. Claire raised the gun again, but before she could fire, security rushed in, wrestling her to the ground. The weapon slid across the floor, landing at Lena's feet. She dropped to her knees beside Adrian, pressing her hands against the wound, tears streaming down her face. Stay with me, she whispered. Please don't leave me now. His hand found hers, weak but steady. You saved me, he murmured. Not the company, not the empire, me. Don't ever forget that. Hours later, the hospital lights were too bright, too quiet. Adrian lay pale but breathing. Lena sat beside him, her fingers wrapped around his. When he opened his eyes, she smiled through the tears. You came back, he said softly. I never left. Outside, the rain had begun again, streaking down the glass walls of the tower. Lena followed him to his office, the one place where it had all started. He stood behind his desk, looking at the city below. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she expected. I built this world out of fear and ambition, and it nearly killed everyone I cared about. She moved closer. You can still rebuild it. He looked at her, finally, really looked at her. I don't want to rebuild an empire. I want to build a life. Before she could respond, the door burst open. Claire stood there soaked from the rain, a gun in her hand and madness in her eyes. You ruined everything, she screamed. Adrian stepped in front of Lena, shielding her. Don't do this, Claire. Her hands shook, but her aim was steady. You took everything from me. You made me nothing. No, he said calmly. You did that when you chose greed over loyalty. The gun fired. The sound tore through the office like thunder. Lena screamed as Adrian staggered backward, clutching his shoulder. Claire raised the gun again, but before she could fire, security rushed in, wrestling her to the ground. The weapon slid across the floor, landing at Lena's feet. She dropped to her knees beside Adrian, pressing her hands against the wound, tears streaming down her face. Stay with me, she whispered. Please don't leave me now. His hand found hers, weak but steady. You saved me, he murmured. Not the company, not the empire, me. Don't ever forget that. Hours later, the hospital lights were too bright, too quiet. Adrian lay pale but breathing. Lena sat beside him, her fingers wrapped around his. When he opened his eyes, she smiled through the tears. You came back, he said softly. I never left. Days turned into weeks. The media exploded with the story of the downfall of the Thompsons and the rebirth of Blackwell Industries, now under new leadership. Adrian stepped down from his role, giving his shares to a foundation that Lena would run in memory of her father and Amelia, Whitmore. On the day of the foundation's opening, Adrian stood beside her in the sunlight, no longer the Frost Emperor, but a man finally free. Cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions, but his attention was only on her. When the ceremony ended, he took her hand. The city was alive around them, people rushing cars, honking, life moving on. He looked at her with quiet awe. I said I don't date employees, remember? She smiled. Then it's a good thing I'm your partner now. He laughed for the first time in years, the sound warm and unguarded. Together, they walked away from the cameras into a new chapter, neither built on control or fear, but on something far stronger. That night, as the city lights shimmered below their balcony, Adrian whispered against her hair. Every empire falls, but love, when it's real, never does.